Hello, Ivy and Pete Ramey here. Welcome to That's My Horse 3. This time we're going to try to grow healthy, well-connected hoof walls on a big old draft horse. We want to do this one for a long time. Draft horses have a special place in mine and Ivy's heart. I've owned around 20 of them in the course of my life, and I had 9 at one time, and that's when I first started learning to shoe horses. It was breaking the bank trying to take care of the hooves on those horses. And Ivy used to run a carriage company and a training company for carriage horses. And actually, that's how we met. So we really like the draft horses. Draft horses, as far as their hooves go, there's some advantages and disadvantages for their feet. Unfortunately, one of the biggest disadvantages that they have going for them is it's so hard to work on their feet, and thus the hoof care is so expensive that many of them are either neglected or at least not getting taken care of as frequently as they should. And on top of that, my opinion only, and this is based on experience, but I think that draft horses' lamina, when the hoof scale didn't just scale up to this larger thing, I think per size the lamina aren't as strong. So it's very difficult to maintain well-connected hoof walls on a draft horse. And flared walls that are just literally peeling off the bone, are so common that to a great extent the draft horse industry just accepted that that's normal. In fact, swear to God, Ivy and I were at a draft horse show and saw a young Percheron that actually had that was being shown at halter, that actually had false flares put on the hoof with epoxy. You could have knocked me over with a feather, but draft horses have the exact same need as every other horse in that they really need to have walls that are well connected to the bone all the way around the front half of the foot, and back on the lateral cartilages, well connected, throughout the entire foot. And it's amazingly rare to find, and so we hope to change that with this video and put the tools in more people's hands to grow in well-connected hoof walls on these horses. So that's the disadvantage they have. The advantage that they have is that, to a point, I think that wall flaring that's so common actually works to their favor to an extent. That most draft horses, you'll very rarely see a draft horse that has the sole and frog lifted up off the ground. The hoof walls just go splat because of the proportionally weak lamina. Again, just my opinion. But the hoof walls go splat, but it leaves the internal structures, coffin bone, lateral cartilages, sitting on the ground throughout life as they're growing, as they're gaining weight. It's very rare to find a draft horse that has an underdeveloped lateral cartilages and digital cushion. Usually you have a nice, robust frog and no sensitivity in the back of the foot that's so common in other breeds. Again, we're talking in generalizations right now, but your typical draft horse foot will have a hoof wall that's just peeling off of it, splits, no lamellar connection. But when you pick up the foot, you've got this beautiful round thick sole and nice robust frog and bars in a really healthy situation. That common trait, and again generalizing, but that very common trait actually allows us to typically trim the hoof walls more aggressively than we could get by with on say a thoroughbred or even a quarter horse. We can trim more aggressively most of the time on the hoof walls to relieve the lever forces that are pulling the hoof walls apart, and without tenderness and risk of lameness. Now, I say that generalizing, but again, with a draft horse, we still have that same responsibility that we have with any other horse to protect the foot as needed. I'll use hoof boots, casting material, epoxies, just as readily on a draft horse as I will another horse if it needs it. But in the real world, you'll find the draft horse is less likely to need protection, from sensitivity. So if you take the advantage that most draft horses have with good sole frog bars, and add to that the ability to grow in a well-connected hoof wall and lamina, then you get a really strong foot. And across the board, I would say that a draft horse is more likely to be a good, sound, barefoot using horse that doesn't need hoof boots or another form of protection. You're more likely to achieve that with a draft horse than any other breed. But you just have to get that part to be able to grow in a well-connected wall. Currently, we're using the Easy Boot Epic. Most riding applications for draft horses or driving. They're going up to a number 7, which will accommodate a majority of your using horses out there. Would like to see some bigger sizes made by someone. We have extensive experience using these Easy Boot Epics with a carriage company that works on the street. They're running 5 horses, taking tourist carriage rides. And at first, I was concerned about excessive wear on the streets going barefoot and what would happen when I wasn't there. So I measured all of the collateral groove depths at the apex of the frog and found that, coincidence, but all their horses were, to have an adequate sole thickness, needed to have the collateral groove lifted 5/8 of an inch off the ground. So I had them measure. I told them to measure every day, and as long as the horse was comfortable, if they had more than 5/8 of an inch of collateral groove depth at the apex of the frog off the ground, that they could run the horse barefoot. If they had 5/8 of an inch or less, then to put the boots on. And that worked perfect. And what happened, the result was that they used the boots very frequently at first. And then over time, they found themselves using the boots less and less and less until 3 of their horses were running barefoot all the time. 2 of their horses were still going back to the boots some. These performed very well. Now, in general, we've moved to the Easy Boot glove. Ivy and I actually helped invent this boot, but it's currently only available up to a size 4.5. But this boot is light years past the Easy Boot Epic in every way, and so as far as the draft horse discussion goes, if you go to order boots for a horse, check the Easy Care site and look at the glove sizes. Make sure that they haven't started manufacturing a glove that's large enough. If they do, I'll highly recommend it over the Easy Boot Epic. It's just a better boot. But for now, today, at size 4.5, really only your smallest draft horses are going to go in this boot. So, but before you order the Epic, see if they've see what they're currently producing in these. And also currently, Easy Care is making this. It's their rehab boot that goes up to a number 7, which is going to accommodate a lot of draft horses. Again, wouldn't mind seeing larger sizes than these, but this is going to get most of them. And this used for a horse that's for turnout, for a horse that's sensitive for turnout, or maybe it's not sensitive but has a thin sole combined with an aggressive trim that you're doing to grow out wall flares, combined with rocky terrain or hard terrain that the horse just needs protection to prevent bruising of the sole. And these work very well for turnout type situations. Okay, that's the rehab boot. Very important. In any training program, professional or personal, this is intended to follow the 10 disc series Under the Horse and the 2 disc series Tools of the Trade. There is a ton of information there that we're assuming that you already have a grasp of before using this video to further your learning. Okay, so here's the horse we're going to try to grow good feet on in this video. He's a teenage Belgian. His feet, I hate to say typical, but sad but true, typical of many draft horses that we see out there. The hoof walls have literally flared away from the bone in every direction. If you look at the height of the cornet off the ground, proportionate to the foot, it should be much higher. So before you even pick up the foot, that should be a clue that we're probably going to have a thin sole, maybe some coffin bone remodeling as well. If you look at the red line in this picture, that red line being drawn parallel with the highest growth at the cornet, which is the hoof the horse wants to have, drawn to the ground, a normal height, you can see the missing material at the bottom, the foot that's not there yet, and then the deviation from the bone at the toe. And growing that foot, that red line, that healthy foot around P3's position with adequate protection for all the internal structures is going to be our primary goal here. All right, so here's the basic situation we have going on right now. We have coffin bone sitting in here at too high of a palmar angle. I'll show you later how to see that. And the hoof wall, which should be running parallel to the coffin bone, deviates just shortly after it erupts from the cornet. You can see that well-connected growth at the top, and just after the last upper half an inch, it just starts separating. We have two stages to our separation. Down close to ground level, we have a true flare that's just, it's grown past the coffin bone and it's peeled out, it's parallel with the ground almost. But up here, way up here to the top, we have a true capsule rotation where we have the hoof wall deviated from P3 all the way to the top. We have lamellar wedge filled in at ground level. And so our true sole, which is in line with the coffin bone way back here, actually appears to be extended out to this region. But this is actually lamellar wedge, not true sole. The true sole that grew from the bottom of P3 way back here. But in this case, it's very difficult to see the difference. I'll show you that when we're looking at the bottom of the foot. So the healthy foot that we want to grow, same as the red line that I drew on the picture, should be well connected to the coffin bone and have adequate height and suspend P3 and adequate height above the ground, which means that we have missing material right in here of sole that we'll need to grow. So in order to achieve this new growth, we're going to have to relieve a lot of pressure out here. And a lot of people, most people in fact, are afraid to trim this wall aggressively enough to actually achieve this well-connected growth. They're afraid to trim enough because they're afraid of excess stress to the sole. And excess stress to the sole is a concern. But being aggressive with trimming the wall doesn't increase that danger. Because if you look at it, this horse is walking around on its soles anyway. The hoof walls aren't helping support this draft horse. So to me, if you're wimpy with your trimming, and that leads to the horse walking around its whole life on its soles with no help from the hoof wall, that's way more dangerous than spending 6 months trimming the walls more aggressively, and so that then the horse can spend the rest of its life with help from the hoof wall in a support role. Now, still, I want to repeat that if your sole is very thin, and or if you have hard rocky terrain, to still use boots to protect the horse until you reach adequate sole. My favorite way to do it is like we did this horse, which is have soft terrain and just go ahead and do it barefoot. But you know, you have to use common sense here. But except to realize that in this situation, being aggressive with the hoof wall is not going to really change anything for the horse as far as what it's experienced on the sole. So if it's rocking around okay like this, it's probably going to be okay, you know, after you trim the foot and relieve this. So on my initial first trim, what I did on this horse was I'm estimating where P3 would hit the ground. And again, I'll show you how to do that when we're looking at the bottom of the foot. I'm estimating where P3 would hit the ground and estimating a 1/8 of an inch thick white line, and then setting break over 1/8 of an inch out in front of that. So what I'm doing is from a trimming standpoint, I'm going to estimate where this healthy wall would hit the ground. You know, if you extended the cornet's growth from the top, and where breakover would be if we didn't have all this wall separation and capsule rotation. And so that would be from, if you projected P3 to the ground and allowed for an 1/8 of an inch thick white line, another 1/8 of an inch of bearing surface, so when out in front of the white line, and then a healthy foot's breakover would come up like that. Now, if we had the missing material filled in, it would be way down here. But I'm going to set breakover in this region and essentially eliminate all of this flare and trim the hoof like that. And then just from the top, take off that extra bit of flare kicking out that way. That's going to also relieve all this area where the horse's hoof wall is peeling apart in layers, and relieve the pressure on that so we can grow healthier stuff in. So my first trim looked like this, which eliminated all of that flared hoof wall that was parallel to the ground. But still, remember we have the true capsule rotation lamellar wedge built in up higher. So we're a long way from the foot that we need to grow. We've just done a beginning first step to growing a healthy foot represented by the red line. And a sneak peek, once we've grown that foot in, this is where we eventually get that now the cornet is higher off the ground. We have well-connected hoof wall, a more upright hoof angle, healthy protection for the horse's foot. And that's where this journey is going to end us. Looking at the bottom of this foot, here you can see, aside from the toe flare already discussed, you can see the tremendous quarter flares that are present as well. Just this horse's hooves are peeling off of it, and it has absolutely no help in vertical support from the hoof wall. On top of that, the heels overgrew and lifted the frog out of function, and that's given us a very weak, cruddy situation. It's been holding mud and manure Our frog is just rotten, peeling off in superficial layers. And if you look at the apex of the frog, you'll see that it blends right into the sole. We have very little depth to our sole. Okay, so again, we'll get to all that later, over and over and over again. But first, let's talk about how we're going to address these quarter flares as well. To be able to deal with the quarter flares and really the disconnected wall all the way around the foot, you have to be able to identify as a starting point where the true sole is. You'll almost always be able to see, particularly if the horse has been barefoot for more than a day, you'll be able to see this imprint of the sole. It's actually the imprint of P3 on the ground here. So ignoring all of the flared, disconnected wall, stretched white line, lamellar wedge, whatever lies outside of that. Look to the bottom of the foot all the way around and visualize where that true sole meets the ground. Now, we'll get into it later. This may even be tricky looking for that because, again, lamellar wedge, which is keratin cells that were laid down between the dermal and epidermal lamina, as opposed to sole cells, which are keratin that's growing from the bottom of P3. This lamellar wedge can blend in with the sole and be very difficult to pick out where the sole is and where the lamellar wedge is. But as a start, just look for this imprint on the ground that I've drawn here. And that'll be the basis for a beginning of seeing the true foot on the horse. Looking at the coffin bone from the front, and if it has a nice healthy sole to it, it projects out from the coffin bone. So this is our sole. And so this would be the imprint that I drew in red that you would see at ground level. Now, if we look at it in a well-connected hoof wall, we'll have our dermal lamina that are attached to the coffin bone, our epidermal lamina that are intertwined in a part of the hoof wall. And they run all the way out to ground level where you can see them. Once you get past the coffin bone, sole material fills in to the other half of the epidermal lamina and creates what we see as white line at ground level. So if we have a good wall connection, which is our goal here, then you should have your sole in that line that I drew around the foot should have an 1/8 of an inch or so wide white line, and then a little flat bearing surface that we'll see on healthy hooves, and then this large bevel. The mechanics of this are fantastic, and particularly as it sinks into terrain and hits rocks and everything, and the horse moves through terrain, as pressure is exerted here, it actually, if anything, creates a squeezing effect on the lamina at impact, so that the lamina aren't getting this separational ripping and tearing type of a force all the time. In our flared situation, which is what we're dealing with here, we still have our epidermal lamina attached